Chairs for the session are Professor Pami Dua, former Director, Delhi School of Economics, and Professor K.L. Krishna, former Director and the senior most faculty member of the DSE fraternity. I request Professor Ram Singh to give the welcome remarks.
A very good afternoon to you all. If you look at the schedule and the DICE plan, I am an intruder in this session, but I am so tempted to make this intrusion to say a very few words about very important people on the DICE. Today is the second day for Diamond Jubilee Conference. We had very exciting day yesterday, and this day has been today has been equally exciting. The process of Diamond Jubilee celebrations was started by my predecessor, former director of DSE, Professor Pami Dua. I am taking this process forward, the process that she started. And also, it's our privilege to have senior most member of DSE fraternity with us on the dais in the form of Professor K.L. Krishna. I think he is the only one around here who can be addressed as sir by everyone without any exception. Then we have very distinguished alumni, Sri NK Singh ji and Professor Gita Gopinath. Together, they are epitome. They epitomize the best that DSE has offered, can offer, has been offering. We are very, very proud of them. You will hear more about them in the form of introduction. But for this specific event, I want to share a couple of things. I want to share how Gita has made added efforts to make it to this event. In the first round, when I approached Sri NK Singh ji, when I approached Gita, they were very kind and prompt to immediately accept the invite. Day before yesterday, in the night, when I thought that everything is ready, we are all set to launch Diamond Jubilee conference inaugural function, I received a WhatsApp message from Gita saying that I didn't want to send this message before least you get too worried. She was not very well. In spite of that, she boarded the flight to make it to this hall, to her alma mater, Delhi School of Economics. It is an indicator of what importance, what emotional, intellectual connect she has with her alma mater, with Delhi School of Economics. And yesterday, last evening, she appeared on TVs. I think it's India Times, India Today. Yes, in India Today, if you watch last 1 minute of her interview, it's about Delhi School of Economics, where she says that whatever economics she has learned and whatever she has become as a result, it's because of Delhi School of Economics. So this is the intellectual, emotional connect that Gita has with us, with the DSE fraternity. With these words, I let the student compare start the session. Thank you so much, Gita. Thank you. It's very special.
All right. Thank you, sir. Now, I request Professor K.L. Krishna to introduce our speaker, Professor Gita Gopinath. Okay. Okay. I request Professor Pami Dua to give the introductory remarks and also introduce our speaker, Mr. NK Singh. Thank you.
Thank you, Ram, for giving your warm welcome to everyone. And I add to that, I warmly welcome all of you and also wish you a very good afternoon. It is a wonderful afternoon. It is an auspicious afternoon for all of us to have two distinguished alumni with us here today to the fireside chat on global economic outlook and related issues. I welcome our distinguished alumni, Sri NK Singh and Professor Gita Gopinath. And also, I want to say that I welcome you not just to this conference, but to your alma mater on this auspicious occasion of the Diamond Jubilee Conference of the Delhi School of Economics. I also take this opportunity to remind all of you that the founder director of the Delhi School of Economics, Professor V.K.R.B. Rao, envisioned an institution that would produce students who would play an important role in the economic development and social progress of the country, as well as actively contribute to policy making. It is evident from our speakers in this session that our founder's vision was truly actualized and that our alumni persevere to add glory to this magnificent institution. So, thank you both for being here. Sri NK Singh and Professor Gopinath are of the 1962 and 1994 batch, respectively, of MA in Economics from the Delhi School of Economics. While neither of them require an introduction, to complete the formality, I will say a few words about Sri NK Singh, and Professor Krishna will do the same for Professor Gita Gopinath. Sri NK Singh is a prominent Indian economist, as we all know, academician, and policy interlocutor. He is currently the president of the Institute of Economic Growth and co convenor of the G20 Independent Expert Group for the Reforms of the Multilateral Development Banks. He was chairman of the 15th Finance Commission and prior to that presided as chairman of the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Review Committee. He was a member of the upper house of parliament, the Rajya Sabha, from 2008 to 2014. He was part of the core group involved in India's economic reforms of 1991, which transformed India's economy and prospects. He was Expenditure Secretary, Revenue Secretary, member of the Planning Commission, and Secretary to the Prime Minister of India, among other senior leadership roles. Sri Singh is also the author of several books, including his autobiography, Portraits of Power, Half a Century of Being at Ringside, and his recent book, Recalibrate Changing Paradigms. He has very recently been conferred the prestigious honorary fellowship from the London School of Economics for his exceptional contribution to London School of Economics and its global community. Hearty congratulations on behalf of the Delhi School of Economics fraternity for this stellar honor. We are very proud to have you here as our distinguished alumnus. Welcome once again, Sri NK Singh. I now request Professor Krishna to say a few words about Professor Gita Gopinath.
Dear friends and distinguished uh, guests and Pamidova, I'm extremely happy to say a few words on this occasion. Um, Let me first refer to uh, Mr. NK Singh, Of course, because in terms of age, I am taking up him as and my paying my respects to him. I think one fact not very well known to this audience is he was a very skilled debater in early 1960s. I think most of the prizes in debates were won by him when he was in the college and later in Delhi School of Economics. So I, Dr. K.N. Raj was the director at that time, and of course, I did not have the privilege of teaching him because I was teaching only economic statistics course, not in the MA economics course. But he was taught by K.N. Raj and B.N. Ganguly. Also, Shiv Subramanian is a statistician. Indian official statistics he used to specialize. Um, of course, the work of Mr. Singh as a chairman of the 15th Finance Commission is very well known. Um, I think, of course, he has been a very well known civil servant all these years without really showing any political biases. Although he was, I think, advisor to for the Bihar government, given his domicile, but he has maintained a kind of impartial image. That is a great thing among, for example, other civil servants are identified with Congress or other, but I think he has the distinction of being very impartial and being seen as impartial. Um, Now I will welcome Gita Gopinath. I think she was my student in 92-94 batch. Of course, she was a bit shy at that time. She didn't show this kind of a promise. Yeah. And in fact, because she was shy, she did not ask me for any testimonials. I think most people who do econometrics take testimonials from me when they apply abroad. And but I think she did not at all ask me. I was surprised. But yeah. I met her again in 2010 when I went to Harvard at the invitation of Professor Jorgensen to launch a new project, productivity project, the Clems for Productivity Project. I think Professor Jorgensen told her that I am leading the Indian team, and she was very nice to come and sit in our presentations, although they were not all very mature at that time. They're not. It was still off-baked study. I must tell you, we completed this study, I think, with the help of Dev Kusundas passed away. He was a very active member of our team, passed away after the report was prepared. And with the help of Dr. Golder, we finalized the report and submitted to the um, Reserve Bank of India, which funded the project for 10 years. Also, I think we have gone several times to Harvard as guests of Professor Jorgensen. I must say, tragically, he passed away due to COVID. Uh, we miss him very much. I must also say, it is not very relevant to this, but before his death, he wrote a very nice foreword to our project on the linked diagrams. How was an appropriate choice for the as a leader, because I met him in 1966 as a friend of my supervisor, Zwiegelikas. Zwiegelikas and Jorgensen, I think both were very experts in productivity analysis. They have a very important paper in Review of Economic Studies in 1967. Um, I think I will not take more time except by say extend a very hearty welcome to both of them especially Gita for. I would also like to mention another association of Gita. Gita was a professor in Chicago University for 5 years. And of course, I'm a product of Chicago. I passed out in 1967 as a student of Ziegler-Nichols. That's an important coincidence for us. Yeah. And then, of course, she moved to Harvard, and she was there for nearly 15 years. Now she is occupying the post of uh, managing director, first managing director of IMF, and I think she has been found to be the most important macroeconomist of this generation. I think she has won that kind of a distinction. Yeah. Yeah. Of course, macroeconomics is not my area, but at Chicago also, although Friedman was there, I was avoiding my macroeconomics. Yeah. Because my interest was more in production functions, productivity, and so on. Yeah. So we are very proud of your achievements, and I can extend a very hearty welcome to you. Yeah.
Thank you, sir, and thank you, ma'am. It is indeed a privilege for all of us here to have the opportunity to get enriched by the words of wisdom of Sri NK Singh and Professor Gita Gopinath, the first Managing Director of International Monetary Fund IMF, whose expertise and journey to progress are sure to motivate and inspire all of us here today.
To continue with the session, we request Professor Pami Dua and Professor KL Krishna to felicitate our speakers, please. I also request Professor Ram Singh to join them.
Can we please have a big round of applause? We indeed have a very enthusiastic audience today.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am. I now request the panel to initiate today's session.
Well, thank you very much. It has really been a very rare honor for me to be part of this prestigious celebration of the Delhi School of Economics, which has privileged to be a former student And to be in this today's 8th Diamond Jubilee celebration is really my proud privilege. And it is with gratitude that I must recognize the contribution in shaping my life from whatever I learned at the Delhi School of Economics by the stellar professors, which not only included Professor Krishna, but I mentioned to him recently, I had the opportunity to speak at the farewell lunch of Professor Jagdish Bhagwati at Columbia University, because both Padma and Jagdish had taught me economics during the period when I was studying here. And indeed, to be part of this panel and far chat with Gita is indeed an honor and privilege for me. So let me begin, Gita, by asking you the first question which I intended to ask. And it's a bit removed from the sort of subject which we will come to later. I've been trying to read about you, Gita. You have been a source quite of inspiration to young students, particularly young women students, in pursuing this. So, in reading about your past, I learned some extraordinary things, frankly, Gita, which I didn't know. I didn't know that, for instance, you had dabbled in sports, you had dabbled in modeling for a while. And so, having done all this, my first really is how, with all these far more interesting things, did you take the decision to be part of pursuing this dismal science, economics?
Thank you. Firstly, I would like to also express my gratitude to the Delhi School of Economics for giving me this opportunity to be a part of this celebration. The 75th celebration is a very big one. And I'm extremely thankful to Ram for inviting me to this. Ram and I met when he came to Harvard. Were you on a Fulbright? You were a postdoc. You were doing a postdoc at that time. And we met and we had lots of very interesting conversations over coffee. And he's somebody I've kept in touch with for a long time. And I think the Delhi School of Economics is really lucky to have him as the director of such an institution. So congratulations to you all. I'm also extremely honored to have Professor K.L. Krishna here. That he made the time to come is, frankly, sir, an honor for me. And I remember you extremely well teaching us. This was 30 years ago, going back to 1994. So 1992 is when I remember the first class we took in econometrics, and you were there. And, you know, I think anybody who's taken a class with Professor Krishna will take away the importance of precision and clarity and, you know, being phenomenally precise about what is it that you're trying to say and solve. I remember he would start writing on the board, and there was never a moment when he had to go and erase the board and change anything. It was absolutely perfect. Every equation he started, he ended, and he did not have to go back and change anything. And I have to say, Professor Krishna, when I went on and I was doing my PhD classes and was taking classes in econometrics, I would think of you a lot, and you were a real source of inspiration. So thank you so much. I did not ask you for a testimonial because I didn't want to put you in a difficult situation of having to say something nice. So it would have been hard to do. I also want to more generally thank the many other professors who I worked with very closely. Professor Partha Sen played a very important role in, you know, me taking up international economics as a field of study and where I did my specialization in. Professor Badal Mukherjee, who was always around and there to have any kind of a friendly conversation. But, you know, Neera Goyal, who was there, who was also fantastic at that time. Professor Sundaram, uh, Pulin Nayak, Kaushik Basu. These are all, don't have the whole list here, but there were many professors who I learned from, and I'm extremely thankful to. In addition to uh, having received an extremely strong technical training in economics, which really sets the foundation for anything I did later on in life, I also have to thank Delhi School of Economics for the reason that here's where I met my husband, Iqbal Singh Dhaliwal. He was also a student, and he regrets not being able to be here, but he wanted me to also mention that he is extremely grateful to this institution. Iqbal went on to top the IAS in 1996. That was 2 years after graduating, and he owes a lot of that to this institution. And the friends I've made when I was here are, again, very great memories that I carry. And I want to say just a couple of lines on NK, which is, it's, if you look at the arc of NK Singh's life and the contributions he has made to the Indian economy and to the global economy, because of which the number of people he knows and who speak extremely highly of him, it's really, you'd hard to find a parallel to you. So again, congratulations to you on that. And frankly, if any of us could come anywhere close to the way NK Singh has contributed in his life, even at this age, he along with Larry Summers did this fantastic report on what is needed to help developing countries and what kind of financing they will need to meet their sustainable development goals, including climate. Hugely influential. It has affected the work that we do at the IMF. So again, your work, and I hope you keep going forever, because this is just so important for the world. And similarly, I think Professor K. Krishna, I think if we can anywhere be like them, as we get wiser, I think this is what we should all aspire for. Now, to your question, as a good economist, I know what comparative advantage is. And I think my comparative advantage was being an economist. And so that's where I am.
Before I leave the personal side, for motivational to people studying and people not doing so well initially, Gita, who can get over an interview which I read given by your mother,
To my father. That was my father.
by your father, who said that all of a sudden, someone who was not scoring so high marks, mentioning you, Gita, all of a sudden started getting marks in the upper 90s. So what's the motivation that you have for students who initially may not do so well, but have yet the best potential and the ability to flower subsequently?
Yeah, so this is an ongoing discussion that I have with my father, because I keep asking him, how did he come up with that number that I got in 7th grade or something?
I know, exactly. That's what you said in the 7th grade.
In 7th grade. Anyway, so it was not in the 7th grade. It must have been an earlier year, because it was not in 7th grade. But in any case, again, the bottom line is just more generally, in my case, of course, there was a time that just came where I just loved the process of learning, and I could spend hours on it. And I think that was basically, it happened at one point, and I really enjoyed it, and that's what took me forward. And it's also one of the reasons why I first went into academia, because I found the intellectual stimulation that comes from learning was just tremendous, and being able to not just learn about the frontier, but to be able to move the frontier of knowledge was exciting. As in anything in life, you have to find something you enjoy doing if you want to become good at it. And I think at some point I was just enjoying my studies.
Thank you. Now, so to say, from these sublime things to the dismal science. You have spoken extensively in today's interviews, which have been published prominently in the Times of India, in the Indian Express, and many others. You have, for good reasons, mentioned about the fact that India is among the economies which are currently doing exceedingly well, with 7% rate of growth in real terms, with inflation management, a great symmetry between monetary and fiscal policy, and that you see a very bright future as you go forward. So, my first question to you is that, as you know, the quest of every Indian, the quest of the current leadership, is how to take India from this position to be a developed economy by 2047. Now, of course, one of the issues which has troubled me is how do you classify what is a developed economy? I know the mechanical definition in terms of per capita income and so on and so forth, but in a broader sense, don't you give any marks of the fact that when you may have contrived this definition of what constitutes a developed economy, the geopolitics have shifted, there have been other more fundamental changes. But leaving that aside, what do you think are the 3-4 key things which India needs to do in the medium term for it to realize its understandable quest to become a developed economy by 2047?
Yeah, I mean, that is, of course, a tremendous aspiration to get to a developed country status. It doesn't happen automatically and requires ongoing, consistent efforts, pretty broad scale across many areas to deliver on that. India has grown well in terms of its overall growth rate, and at 7%, it is the fastest growing major economy in the world. The question is, how does one keep up the momentum, but in fact raise it further so that you can increase per capita incomes in India to get to being an advanced economy, which is what it would take. In terms of what is needed, this is across the board. Firstly, India needs a workforce that is much more skilled, much higher levels of education. So if you look at the years of formal education, for example, for the workforce in India compared to its other G20 peers, it's on the lower end. So increasing the quality of education, the depth of that education, the amount of skills that students pick up is going to be absolutely critical if one has to get to, upper middle income, high income, and then high income status. That's going to be up. Without it, it just does not happen. The second, of course, is investing in infrastructure. The government has done a lot on that front, on public infrastructure and digital infrastructure, but there is still a big gap between what is needed and where the country is. Clearly, there is, every intention of the government to continue on that front, and more investment will be needed in terms of raising public infrastructure, and that's going to be a very important part of it. Third is just having the kinds of institutions that are needed in the country to support all kinds of development. So in terms of the ease of doing business, the kind of regulatory environment that you have, the kind of judicial system, the efficiency of the judicial system is going to be critical. The kinds of land reforms, absolutely critical. In the case of labor markets, much greater flexibility in the labor markets. In 2019, the parliament passed a new set of labor codes. Those codes provide a nice blend between getting labor market flexibility, but also protecting workers. Implementing that is going to be absolutely critical. Keeping open to trade is important. We are certainly in an environment where trade integration is being questioned, but I think it is very important for India to remain to open up to trade even more. On average, tariff rates in India are higher than in its other peer economies. If it wants to be an important player on the world stage, and an important part of global supply chains, it's going to require reducing those tariffs, investing in the health of people in the country, making sure that everybody has an equal opportunity, ensuring, and this is super important, that women's labor force participation goes up from where it is now at 35%. There's no path to get to a high income status without being able to bring more women into the workforce, for which the safety is absolutely critical. All of this, doing all of this on an ongoing basis is what it will take to keep progressing on the path towards high income.
Thank you, Gita. I think that's a fairly comprehensive set of things which you have mentioned very succinctly. Before I come to the granularity of some of those things, which you have passed in today's comprehensive interview, also mentioned. But let me pick on one thing which you mentioned, which is the fact that far greater investment is necessary in terms of improving the quality of pedagogy and education. You also mentioned infrastructure and ease of doing business. Before I get into that somewhat later, in the wider context of reforming the international financial architecture, the fund has been one of those, particularly your managing director mentioning that clearly to meet the challenges of financing, for instance, the huge needs on climate and climate change, you require far greater domestic capital mobilization. How does one create, in your view, and what kind of policies will create far greater fiscal space for allowing public outlays to be very substantially increased? If you recall the broad number, it was clear that far more than what you could get from international financial institutions, domestic resource mobilization by countries was central. What are some of the prescriptive things which you can suggest for India to enhance its fiscal space significantly, keeping in mind the fact that the need to create monetary and fiscal policy symmetry must be central to macroeconomic management?
Yeah. So, governments around the world are grappling with very high spending needs. There's the spending needs that just come from the day-to-day job of running the country, but in terms also of the additional spending that's needed to deal with the climate transition, to deal with the digital transition, including AI, in addition to the fact that many countries have aging populations and being able to provide for them in terms of health, but also in terms of pensions. Numerous areas in which countries are called upon to invest. And so the question is, how do you manage all that spending? And I think the number that you put in your report was for emerging and developing countries, you're looking at an envelope like $3 trillion a year is what it will take to get all the spending done. And this is needed spending, right? This is required spending. So this is a lot of money. And the question is, how do you do that in an environment where countries now have record high levels of public debt? Interest rates are much higher than they were, 5 years ago. And so this really puts a constraint on how you can move forward and how you can make this happen. Now, what's absolutely right is what you said, which is that in terms of looking outwards for how much of the money you can rely on from, say, international institutions or international, multilateral development banks, for example, it's going to be a fraction of what is the spending that's needed. So it's going to rely on domestic resource mobilization. So in the case of India, again, given its stage of development, increasing fiscal space is not going to come about through reducing overall spending, right? So overall expenditures are going to go up. It's just given where it is on the growth cycle, given that it has to undertake public investment and all these other spending needs that exist. So the creation of fiscal space and the any fiscal consolidation should happen comes through raising revenues. It should be through the channel of raising revenues to GDP. So in the specific case of India, one example of how to increase revenues, the share of GDP, is to do more with the GST. Now, GST has begun to deliver good results. As we see it, if there is a way to simplify it further, so you have fewer of these different tax rates, and broaden the base, which is you have fewer exemptions, then you can end up with raising about 1 percentage points of GDP in revenue additional through this. On the expenditure side, while the overall expenditure envelope is unlikely to be kind of brought down given the spending needs, but you can certainly look under the hood and look at pieces where more can be saved. For example, if you take the case of fertilizer subsidies, it's pretty untargeted at this point. It's given an unlimited amounts to farmers. One way to target it is, for example, a pilot that's being done by Karnataka, where they're looking at tailoring it to the size of the farm. I mean, that's also, by the way, environmentally friendly, but that's a kind of improving the targeting of the subsidies. There's already a lot being done to direct benefit transfers, which is saving money in terms of leakages, but doing more on that front by making sure that the beneficiaries are really, the list of beneficiaries that you have are indeed the right group that you're trying to target. So saving on that front can also play an important role. And on the revenue side, again, I think having, our view is that having a much more broader tax base for personal income tax is also going to be helpful.
Just pursuing that bit of yours, Gita, in the last Article 4 consultations of the fund, the last two, there were repeated suggestions that without playing around too much with tax rates and so on and so forth, you are losing roughly 3 percentage points of GDP by way of revenues. And that if this was to be available or realized, it would dramatically alter the fiscal space of the government. Now, you mentioned that very correctly, that the GST has begun to show results, also suggesting that there was need to continue this process in terms of much greater progress on rate rationalization and so on. How would you react to the suggestion that we need to restructure beyond that in the area of direct taxes, an area where, of course, the finance minister has announced the constitution of a group to look into direct taxes? What would be cross-country comparisons in terms of what advice you can give to India in terms of the overall framework of our taxation policy, with this particular emphasis on direct taxes?
Yeah, so this is, India has parallels with other developing countries where most of the tax revenue that's collected is indirect taxes and not direct taxes. It's not in the form of income taxes. Those numbers start from an extremely low base. And we think, like we've been advising other developing countries too, that it is helpful to broaden the personal income tax base, and so that you can have more income coming from there. I think in the case of India, there was this cut in corporate income tax. I think that was helpful. But again, what usually happens is it's less the rate that matters, but just making sure that there are no loopholes and there are not too many leakages that happen in terms of exemptions. That usually there's so much going on in the tax code that you end up giving a bunch of exemptions and then you don't end up collecting enough taxes. We also, by the way, think it is very important to have sufficient progressivity in your tax system and to make sure that that is actually delivering. In the case of India and other countries in the world, I think the more focusing, making sure that you're getting enough from your capital gains tax, from your capital income tax, is going to be critical. Also, we think more in many countries can be done on property tax front. There is much better technology to be able to implement this better. And again, that's another area where work is needed. Now, what we have seen more generally for countries, and this comes back to the first point we discussed, is the way you can improve your fiscal space without constraining growth too much is making sure that you have structural reforms going on all the time. Because when you do that and you're raising productivity in the economy and you're expanding the scope of the economy, you end up also with just improving your debt to GDP and your fiscal situation.
Gita, no one knows better than you that technology is no respecter of sovereignty, and that far reaching technological changes, which are inevitable, you cannot block, and they will inevitably reach you. In this context, this issue which you have touched on per se, and which is of great concern, is that whereas India wants to be at the cutting edge of trying to absorb the cutting edge of technology in terms of robotization, artificial intelligence in multiple forms, we were one of the early starters of being able to adopt the best features of how to reach broadband connectivity to every home. But the fact remains that in terms of our demographic pressures, the age dependency ratio, the profile, it is more, it is as much job displacing as job creating. So, how does one combine the asymmetry, which seemingly looks an asymmetry, in being in a position to absorb the far reaching technological changes, being able to generate gainful employment to women, to the youth, and looking at our demographic profile?
Yeah, this is also a great question, and again, something that many of our member countries are grappling with. We've gone through this period of automation in manufacturing, which raised the capital intensity of manufacturing and the amount of jobs that are required for the jobs that get created for the same amount of manufacturing output has declined. And now with the new generation of AI, including generative AI, we are looking at an automation of services. So I think it's a fair question to ask about, especially if you're in a country where you have abundant labor, which is not true for many countries. Some countries, they are really struggling with the shortage of workers. But in a country with abundant labor, how does one deal with these kinds of technological transitions? So the first thing I think is very important for all governments is to take a pause and also make sure that the policies that they have in place are not favoring automation inadvertently, right? Because there are numerous kinds of tax incentives that are provided for many different things. And to be able to get the best of technology, you absolutely want to be able to have the market adopt it where it is valuable. But you don't want to be inadvertently tilting the ground in favor of automation. And that is something that we've been studying at the IMF and looking at different countries to see how much that happens. Secondly, the more prepared you are as a country to absorb the technology, the more likely you are also to benefit from it. So we've done a study on AI preparedness. We've looked at about over 170 countries, and we've looked at 4 indicators. The first is the level of human skills, how trained the workforce is, especially on digital skills and so on. The second is the amount of digital infrastructure that exists and how deeply widespread it is in the country. Third is what kind of entrepreneurial environment do you have? It involves ease of being able to start new kinds of businesses, the flexibility of being able to move from one kind of business to another, innovation and so on. So that's a third bucket. And then the fourth bucket is, of course, what kind of regulatory environment do you have to make sure that this technology gets adopted for the benefit of the people, and doesn't come with all of its its side effects in the form of misinformation and biases and so on. So how do you have the right kind of policies and regulations in space? So if you look at those 4, the country that comes, for example, number 1 is Singapore in the list of AI preparedness. India is at about as an intermediate level of preparedness. It's somewhat slightly above the average for emerging markets and developing economies. So it's slightly above the average. But again, here if you look at within those indicators, the indicator on the labor force, the level of education, the level of skilling, that's the area where it's a lot more work is required for it to be able to adapt. So, I think what is important is, firstly, just to summarize, just to make sure that the ingredients that you need in the country to be able to benefit from a technology exists. So that requires work. Second, to make sure that you are not inadvertently tilting the playing field in favor of automation, which can happen based on your tax policies and so on. And third, you have to make sure that your social security system, social safety nets that exist, the ability to retrain, reskill, all of that is being developed at the same time, so that when you have workers who have to shift jobs, that they can go through, they get some kind of unemployment insurance, they're able to move to another job, they're able to train for it. Singapore, by the way, also has this program where it provides grants for lifelong learning, which may be something that may be needed in this world where you have constantly new technologies and new kinds of things that machines can do. So you want to make sure that your skills are complementing, what automation brings along, but that's going to require paying attention to all of these things.
Well, Gita, let me take you now from the national to where you mentioned the work which Larry and I have done in the reform of the international financial architecture, particularly the multilateral development banks. Now, we see some incremental progress there on positive changes on the multilateral development banks. Although in terms of the stock-taking report, I think that we are nowhere near the end game. But from the multilateral development banks, I want to take you to the subject which is very dear to you. We are approaching the 80th anniversary of the Bretton Woods Conference. And it's a time when we should look at the changed context, the fractured geopolitics, the fragmentation of the world in increasingly more and more uncertain directions. Suppose I were to put to you that has the International Monetary Fund been able to live up to the contemporary challenges in terms of using its SDR in a manner which is need-based and not quota-based, in a manner where the fund which you have created, the trust fund for climate, can be beefed up much more and the resources assigned actually given, in terms of fundamentally repositioning the fund to meet the growing challenges of sustaining growths in large parts of African countries, consistent with the financing of climate change. And since all this must come under review, as we look at the contemporary relevance of the Bretton Woods institution, how would you want these institutions to respond to these obvious questions which are being raised all over the world?
Absolutely. So this is indeed the 80th anniversary of the so-called Bretton Woods institutions. It's basically the creation of the IMF and the World Bank. And it's a great moment to take stock of where these institutions are and what is it that they need to do much more of going ahead. It's something that we deal with on a daily basis, but it's always helpful when you have an anniversary to say, okay, well, maybe this is something we should pay a lot more attention to. The world in 2024 is very different from the world in 1944 when these institutions were created. The kinds of challenges countries are facing are different from then. Climate change is not something that people were talking about in 1944. That's a big issue right now. Artificial intelligence is not something people were talking about in 1944. It's a big deal now. in addition, of course, to all the long-standing other issues of financial crises and standard plain vanilla debt issues and exchange rate issues and so on. So those are the bread and butter issues of the IMF. But now you have newer kinds of crises that have implications for what an institution like the IMF has to do. In addition, 2024, in terms of the world map, in terms of where is the biggest share of GDP, where is growth coming from, looks very different too. We have countries like China and India that have grown substantially, and their presence on the global map, unlike what they were back in 1944. So it's a different world, and as an institution, we really take it very seriously that the IMF caters to the needs of its members, given where we are, and also over time starts also looking more like the membership and where the world is right now. So how are we changing on climate? We have created the Resilience and Sustainability Trust just a couple of years ago. This is a facility that for the first time, the IMF provides long-term financing at concessional rates to low-income countries and vulnerable middle-income countries. We have about 20 such facilities that we have providing to countries, a total of about $10 billion that's been committed to it. And we are getting our members to contribute to this funding of this Resilience and Sustainability Trust so that we can use that to help more of our membership. So this is something new. It's not something that we've done in the past. This is a real change from the past. It's not just on climate. It also is to help with pandemic preparedness. Second, Poverty Reduction and Growth Trust that's been around for a while. It's to help low-income countries. During the pandemic, we had a huge demand for this money. 57 low-income countries is how many we've supported since the pandemic. And that we again lend on extremely concessional terms, but to be able to finance that and to keep that going, we're on this constant effort to make sure that we have the resources for it. And we're undertaking a whole review of how we can help low-income countries further. If you look at the debt landscape, in the past, there used to be only a few Western economies that were mostly lending to low-income countries. Now you have very new set of creditors, including China, including India, including Saudi Arabia. Many of these new creditors have come in. This, on the plus side, there is money going into these countries from these creditors. But of course, that then also means we have to rethink how the debt restructuring system works. Now we have new systems in place, the common framework. And at the IMF, we work with the World Bank to create this global sovereign debt roundtable that also helps with this. So we're working on multiple fronts. In terms of the governance of the institution, again, like I said, it's important for that to also reflect the changing times. The membership just approved a 23rd chair for Sub-Saharan Africa. So another executive board member, basically for Sub-Saharan Africa, which again increases their representation at the IMF, and that plays an important part. We're also looking at realigning and quotas for countries so that, again, it represents the world that we live in. So it's changed in many, many different ways. And let me just, end by saying that if you look at the IMF's Articles of Agreement, there is a line which talks about the managing director of the IMF. And the line says, he will take on these responsibilities. It was hard to imagine that there could be a woman in this position. And I just want to end by saying that the top 3 people at the IMF are now all women. And that is about to change.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Gita. Of course, without meaning this to be a repartee, the question would remain subsisting in our mind before I come to my last question, is the fact that I see that these institutions are changing, they are adapting. But we know the old adage that nature abhors vacuum. And if these institutions do not adapt and show resilience and adaptation, you may have more alternatives coming up, which may or may not be such rule-based organization, and could undercut the foundations of multilateralism, which is the heart of the post-Second World War recovery. Now, this is really more saying to myself than a question to you. The need, therefore, for institutions to respond in a positive direction and respond perhaps fast enough. But let me ask the last question, which I intended to. Economics as a discipline, which I did long ago, much before you. KL, who is present here, had done it even before that. I did it at a particular point in time. You did it later. This is evolving, the pursuit of economic and social discipline. To all the students who are listening to you with such rapt attention, what is your message of how do you see economics as a discipline evolve, and what should they prepare themselves as they begin to get more and more and deeper into the pursuit of this subject at this prestigious Delhi School of Economics?
So, firstly, something I want to just share, and especially something I've come to appreciate after moving to the IMF, is that economics is actually very useful. It is, so as the first deputy managing director of the IMF, I'm very closely involved with many countries. We have 190 member countries, and I deal with several of them. I don't think I appreciated this much as an academic, but as a public policy economist, I've really come to appreciate that this is an area, this is a field, this is a science that teaches you skills, that makes you a useful member of society, that actually gives you the tools to be able to make a difference in countries, to livelihoods, to the kinds of lives people live. So firstly, that just tell you that it's an exciting area to be in. There is no lack of important economic questions that are going around in the world. You know, there are, for example, it depends. If you're a macroeconomist, which is what I am, and what comes most easily to mind, there are big questions of how is it the world is going to handle the new transitions in terms of climate change, in terms of AI. What does all of that imply for monetary policy making, for fiscal policy making, for capital markets? All of these kinds of questions are just big and important and profound. The other thing I want to mention is that, you know, sometimes economists get complaints that maybe you are too wedded to your models and your that you have some pretty strict formulas that we think countries around the world should follow. Like, for example, fiscal discipline, inflation targeting. You know, this is advice that we give to many countries around the world, and it's something that we learn when we're in school. And is there is that at the detriment to countries because we're not being sufficiently flexible? My personal experience, because I went as chief economist to the IMF in 2019, 2020 we had the pandemic, and 2022 Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and big increase in world interest rates everywhere. And what has been very gratifying for me to see is that if you look at emerging markets, the emerging and developing countries, not the low-income countries, but the middle-income countries, everybody thought middle-income countries would really suffer badly, that we would see crises everywhere, middle-income crises everywhere. We did not see that. And of course, the research will come back with answers about why that was the case. But I think an important takeaway for me is that it was a reflection of these countries, many of these countries, which otherwise had faced big crises in the 1980s and 1990s. These were countries who basically went to inflation targeting regimes over the last 2 to 3 decades, went into proper fiscal planning, medium-term fiscal frameworks, recognizing the fiscal deficits are important. It was the boring economic prescriptions that basically gave these countries the fortification that was needed to deal with the crisis that they're in. So again, I think that just the basic principles really do deliver. And in any area, in terms of any area that you work in terms of any question you take up, or any particular model you're studying, or any empirical phenomenon you're studying, just asking yourself every time you read about it, that how is this relevant for the world? How is what I'm doing going to help change thinking on a particular topic? Is very helpful. You don't want to make economics an end in itself. It is something that is very useful for the world. So every time you work with it, use that lens. And I think that will give you, first of all, that I think will hopefully make it more enjoyable and keep moving you along.
Well, thank you very much, Gita. Thank you for this interactive session. And let me end by saying that since you mentioned Larry several times in your remarks, Larry is now working as a distinguished member of Gen OpenAI, and he takes great pride in that. And hopefully what he's doing now will not really disable everything which you and I have learned in our lifetime. So thank you very much for this opportunity, for this interactive session.
Thank you, sir and ma'am, for such a thought-provoking and insightful discussion that explicitly sets out the roadmap towards the Viksit Bharat in the current geopolitical economic scenario.
So we'll proceed with the Q&A session right now.
Yes, there is, I think that some time left. I should have mentioned. Gita has generously agreed to take a few questions. I may not be, I think I see a great degree of interest, but perhaps will you be generous enough to take a few? Well, I see the hand here. Please mention your name and ask the question briefly.
I'm Manish Sharma. I'm Manish Sharma. My basic question is that that we are finding that that the